Good evening. Good evening and welcome very, very much to Conversations, where we're pleased on this first segment of a two-part segment where we're concerned overall with the questions of photojournalism and some of the problems and challenges of that field. We're pleased to welcome here in the first section of the program Bob Dannin. And Bob Dannin is the director of a unique organization called Magnum Photos, headquartered here in New York. And Bob, welcome very, very much to Conversations.
Thank you, Harold.
I wonder if you'd share the historical development of Magnum, when it got started, and what some of its historical obligations were, and then we could talk some about the ongoing activity there and some of the people that are involved. But Magnum, when did it get started and so forth?
Magnum was formed as a collective about 40 years ago, exactly 40 years ago to be quite precise, by three of the top photojournalists that were working in Europe in their day. Henri Cartier-Bresson, Robert Capa, and David Seymour. Capa and Seymour were East European immigrants, and Cartier-Bresson was a Frenchman with a fine arts background. 8 years later, both Capa and Seymour were dead. Capa stepped on a mine in Vietnam covering the Viet Minh, and David Seymour, within 2 days of Capa's death, was killed in a tank battle in the Sinai covering the First War.
Yeah, they had been under the gun. They were really dangerous situations that they were in, and they were killed, as you say, just almost at the same time.
That's right.
Yeah, it bespeaks the danger often that is involved with photojournalism that perhaps we don't appreciate sufficiently in the society. But why was it that they formed this? They would have been part of other agencies prior to that. Why did they form? What was the raison d'etre of the new Magnum that they formed?
These were men who were photojournalists and the top photojournalists of their day. However, the publications that they were working for, which were the dominant media of the time, this was an antecedent to television, to television coverage. And, of course, there was no live radio coverage of these situations. These men were engaged. They were the engagés of their period. And the publications for whom they worked thought that they owned their work. Magnum was formed primarily to protect the work of these people for several years and almost for a decade. Some of the largest media organizations in the world boycotted Magnum Photos.
They did?
Yes.
They saw it as a threat to their economic power and control that they had had.
It was a battle that Magnum engaged and eventually won. Today, every photojournalist has the copyright to their pictures.
They do, even those that aren't associated with Magnum.
Even those that are not associated with Magnum.
So they were on the front lines in another sense, beyond being on the front lines in a war-making situation. They were on the front lines in terms of this management relationship arrangement between the artist and the creator, the photographer, and the people who run the magazines.
That's right, and they were also on the front lines in terms of the topics and subject matter that they decided to cover. Robert Capa gained fame covering the Spanish Civil War.
Indeed.
Even before the inception of Magnum Photos.
Yeah, famous photo. They live forever. Yes,
very, very famous photo. Right. Henri Cartier-Bresson was one of the first photographers to study China before and after the Cultural Revolution. He was one of the first Western photographers to fully document developments in post-Stalinist Russia. Beyond that, there's an esprit de corps, almost an iconography that carries over even to today, in which these men are the totems, they're the clan masters of Magnum, and very, very much respected. They've set a tradition. They've also set a theme, being the collective theme, being the theme of being ahead in the news. Our slogan at Magnum, more or less, even in today's world of electronic journalism, is that we always want to be coming back from the story when everybody else is on their way down.
You want to be on top of it ahead of time, or be able to perhaps, in a sense, know ahead of time what it is that's going to be breaking and get there before it happens. So
it's knowing ahead of time. I think it's knowing ahead of time, not necessarily in the commercial sense. It's not that so we can be there first, so that we can be the first ones to sell the material. We have a role, I think, to play in the media. I think it's a role that traditionally Magnum and other organizations, be them organizations, word organizations or image organizations, it's a role of creating and pushing the media to focus attention on something that is important in the world, to focus attention on information. I think even before the media, even before the electronic media, if you examine some of the I don't think we can go into it here, but if you examine some of the developments in science and literature throughout the history of Western civilization, you will see that there's this constant movement. There's a constant movement of small organizations, of lone voices, of individuals who are particular scholars in a certain area, who try to focus attention, who say, there's a subject that the public should be concerned with. There's a subject where more information should be disseminated to the public. And this is a process of education, I feel.
And it's the belief of Magnum, which is a cooperative. It's a cooperative. So all the people, we want to talk about the current structure of it. It's a cooperative, has been. The photographers themselves and the photojournalists make up Magnum in a certain sense. So it's setting the aesthetic standards and the standards of coverage and what would be covered. So it's a great deal more than just having somebody represent them in some business sense in a traditional way.
It's much more. It's much more
of
a
philosophic
mission than just an agent representing something that gets taken to market. Aesthetically, it is the only organization in the business where the members, the people who create the work, create the images and the information, are judged by their peers. It's very difficult to be accepted into the organization.
Yeah, maybe we could talk a little bit about that. How many are there in it? And it is a cooperative apart from other agencies that are concerned with, the concerns of photojournalism. But maybe the structure of itself, the Magnum itself. How many are there in the cooperative? It has a world reputation, but who?
We have offices in London, Paris, and New York.
Yes.
And if you take the member photographers of those offices and put them together, you can count 40 full-time members and about 10 other people who are associated with Magnum in some way. There are correspondents in India and Japan who have been associated with Magnum for a very long time but have never participated as such members.
You have 40. You have 40, and I know it's your director and so forth. It'd be fair to say that you're sure you got the best people, but they represent some of the very top photographers in the world, in a sense. And admission into Magnum is at the selection of the cooperative members themselves.
That's right.
They want to set those high aesthetic standards, in a sense, or if that's the right term.
They maintain a balance between aesthetic standards and high journalistic integrity.
And you have this, and also it's mundane workaday things, but you're divided into 3 sections at Magnum. You have an archival function, you have an editorial function. Maybe just these are nuts and bolts, but
sure.
You've got
there's
3
an archival
functions,
function. There's a photo library, which is probably the most complete photo library in terms of historical material and material of journalistic importance.
Yeah.
There's an editorial department, and there is also a corporate public relations department, which is, in some sense, the generator of the place. Because of the aesthetics involved, a lot of Magnum photographers are called upon to work in the corporate world.
Yeah, well, that's it. Now, you would help them in a specific way yourself as director, and it's interesting, too. You have a doctor of anthropology. You're an academically trained person that got in. It must be an interesting place for somebody who studied in Japan, who studied in France, and has taken a doctorate in anthropology to be working in this very, very lively setting and so forth. And it must be that. It's lively, dealing with these aesthetic and artistic people. It's a very interesting place to be, I would think.
It's a very interesting place to be. I wish you could be there.
Yeah.
I wish a lot of other people could be there because my job would be a little bit easier. I'd be able to be able to navigate the waters of running the place.
Yeah.
It is a very lively place.
Yeah.
It is a place where you have to convince almost everybody in the place that a story is worth doing before you can go ahead and do it.
Now you're talking about getting a story that some person, a journalist, will go out and cover or something,
right.
and then you have to find somebody. You're going to place that story ahead of time with some magazine?
Sometimes the story can be placed ahead of time. The photographers at Magnum are well known, and when a story comes up that that particular editor at a magazine in Europe or a magazine in the United States knows that this is the man for the job, they'll call us up and they'll say, we'd like so and so to be on the next plane to New Delhi.
Yeah, the reputation precedes them. Yeah, right. Other times you might want to suggest it to them that there's something that could be done.
Other times we might want to suggest it to them. We spend an awful lot of time suggesting an awful lot of things to magazines and other publications in the United States and elsewhere about what we think should be done, and a lot of times, more often than not, we strike out with them. Our basic modus operandi, which has been the driving force of Magnum throughout its history, is the ability and the will to go out and do stuff on speculation. Both Kappa and Seymour were killed doing stories on speculation. That means that they really weren't getting a dime for what they were doing when they were out there.
But they believed in it themselves.
They believed in it themselves.
It's an important beginning point, isn't it?
Sure.
Yeah, yeah. And you have these people, and I wonder if we could talk about, you've been able to cover a great number of stories. You like to be able to have a story. There's a possibility of a single film, a single picture. There's a story of pictures telling a story. There's a story behind this that's involved, and you've had a great number of stories that the people at Magnum have covered. You've had famine in Africa. You've had people mining people in Brazil and homeless in the United States and so forth. Maybe you could share some of those stories with us, or some of the photos of the people that make it up, and some of the photographers that are involved, if you would.
The way we generate the stories, and the way the stories are put together, derives from a certain tradition, which began early in this century in Europe, and then was picked up again, once again in 1934 when Life magazine began. And that is showing story in sequence, in still photo sequence, over maybe 3 or 4 or even 10 or 20 pages. The proponents of this type of journalism today in the United States is something like National Geographic, or something like the old Life magazine. It's very rare today to see a magazine spend more than 2 or 3 pages on a single story, let alone pictures. The pictures share the space with words, and the division between picture people and word people in the magazine business is a very jealously guarded domain on both parts.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, it's interesting. It's interesting to kind of pick apart and analyze not just the pictures in the sequence, but the amount of knowledge, the ability that they have to impart knowledge to people who are looking through these magazines. Now, presumably, people who look through the magazines are literate, but again, it's interpretation. It's interpretation of pictures. Over the past 12 months, we have covered some very, very interesting stories. We have covered stories that relate to specific things that are going on. For example, homelessness in America.
Yeah, that's it.
We've been at the vanguard of this coverage. It's very, very hard work. It's like operating in a bureaucracy in a socialist country to try and get meaningful pictures out of a shelter for the homeless in New York City, for example.
All right. Yeah.
It takes a long time. It takes dedication. It takes the willingness on a part of a photographer to go back every day and say, I want to be in there and argue. We had the support of the state of New York to try and get into these places. And the city, HRA, blocked us. They blocked the photographer. The state, the governor's office, deputized the photographer, and he was still blocked at the entrance to the shelter for
Now,
homeless.
why would that be? Why? Why would there be this? Just bureaucratic...
It's a bureaucratic tussle.
Yeah.
It's an aspect of how the city wants to manage its image.
Yeah, you might have people often, particularly if there's going to be something showing the seamier side or the underside of life, you might have agencies here or around the world that would not want that story told in a certain sense. I suppose that's a problem in some cases. In this homeless case, it might be a problem. Or in other cases where
there may be people
a negative image or an image they don't...
There may be people who are unwilling to spend the time or dedicate themselves for a few months to try and go after this type of a story.
Yeah.
You can see a single image in the newspaper. Any of the local newspapers, once or twice a year, run single images, sometimes multiple images. But the thing to remember is that the photographers spend maybe 10 minutes, half an hour maximum.
Yeah, you can show us some of those homeless pictures now. Then
Sure.
Who's the photographer here?
Paul Fusco.
Yeah, right. He did these, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, they're beautiful. How long a period of time do you happen to know? Maybe you don't know. How long a time he would have been involved in this particular project? And
he worked for a solid 3 months on a project.
He did.
Yes,
that long, right? He did. Magnificent. I mean, you know, it's a difficult task. How many photographs would he have made out of how many? We're seeing these photographs here. How many would there have been in this overall group that he did? Do you happen to know? I mean,
well, he shot it on black and white, so
yeah.
he probably shot minimum of 400 rolls of picture of film. And this is you can multiply that times 36.
Yeah, right. And so we're showing this here. Also, there was a series in Life magazine recently, wasn't there, about a mining community
that was in the New York Times magazine.
It was a New York Times magazine. You're right. I'm sorry. New York Times magazine about a mining community. Who was involved in that? Striking photographs.
One of our most prominent photographers, a Brazilian named Sebastiao Salgado Jr., who now lives in Paris, a former employee of the World Bank and the International Monetary Funds, who decided to put down his camera, put down his pen, pick up a camera, and do something relevant.
Absolutely amazing photographs. Absolutely amazing photographs. This is a mining community up in Brazil.
This is in the middle of the Amazon.
Yeah.
It's called Serra Pelada, or Bald Hill, and it's open only several months of the year.
Yeah.
And these months of the year, the garimperos, as they're called in Brazil, it's a Bosch painting. It looks like a, it looks like a Bosch painting. Some of the other things that we've covered, which are very relevant to some of the issues that are being discussed in the newspapers today, some of the issues that are not being discussed, are the interconnection between war and famine in Africa.
All right.
Salgado himself covered the famine in Africa in 1983 and 1984. Those pictures have gone on to become world-famous pictures. Now, last February, our correspondent in South Africa told me that he was going to Mozambique, that there was a famine going on in Mozambique. There was a war going on in Mozambique.
Who is this name?
His name is Gideon Mendel.
All right,
The nature of his coverage was such that he went with the support of a local New York newspaper who was able to provide enough to get him there. They were able to pass some of the pictures, but there was a problem in comparing the famine in Mozambique and the famine in the Sahel. By the time the editorial staffs of newspapers and magazines around the world were saturated with pictures of the famine in the Sahel, images of stark people walking in a desert, women with shriveled breasts feeding their children. Well, editors, when I said there's a famine in Mozambique, here are the pictures. And I showed them pictures. Here's a picture of the famine in Mozambique. They said, well, that's not a famine. How can that be a famine? We don't know what a famine is doing. Why is that a famine in Mozambique? We don't see any people there.
But there would have been a story. Did he report any in words and so forth? Report and that sort of thing, or this is a problem, right? Very often you run into the.
This is a problem. This is a problem which I would refer to as the reification of the image in the consciousness of editors and the public, in fact. It's a very difficult problem. And beyond that,
and this is one you're very concerned with there, and the people there, right?
The people at Magnum are concerned with that. Beyond that, I think there's very little realization of the interconnections between war and famine in Africa and other parts of the world. The stuff doesn't rot on the docks in Cambodia or in Mozambique because it's rotting there. It means that it cannot be moved out into the countryside. In the case of Mozambique, South African-backed rebels are blocking the passage of this food to the areas that are struck by famine and drought. It's very difficult to convince people in the business of choosing stories and pictures that these are important points.
Is that because there aren't enough avenues, there aren't enough venues for the really good photography or the really good stories that there are out there? Is that the basic problem, do you think it is? Or is it the mentality of the people who, in an economically oriented sense, perhaps, there are some problems and so forth?
Well, I guess
there are more good images able to be done by good photographers and good people with a good sense of a story than there are venues or ability for them to be able to be brought to the citizenry. So the mix between those two is a problem, sociological problem, maybe?
Well, I'd like to go on record as being an optimist, and in that sense say that it's a commercial problem, that there are not enough venues for the stuff to be aired in public. That television has taken over the prime commercial renters, and there's very little space left in magazines. On the other hand, that's a partial explanation. A lot of the people that are involved in selection, artistic direction of magazines and book publications that feature pictures, they just don't have it. So I don't think.
Well, all right, Well, so that has to be worked out. You want to work that, and you want to be able to maybe enlighten them to something that is there. So it's sort of a teaching or learning experience on their part, a teaching or consciousness-raising experience on your part, and so forth. Maybe we have another one. You had some examples of you have other examples of photojournalism you could show here.
This series of pictures were done by an Iranian photographer who's been associated with Magnum for many years. His name is Attar Abbas. He covered the Iranian Revolution, and afterwards he got out. Since then, he's been concerned with documenting the rise of Islamic fundamentalism around the world. These pictures come from Egypt and Malaysia. The Egyptian pictures are quite interesting. Egypt is in the news quite often. It's on the front page of the Times every 4 or 5 months as warnings from the John Kiffner, the correspondent, saying there's something brewing in Egypt. Well, everybody has known that since the assassination of Sadat. The series from Malaysia is quite interesting because Abbas talked to me after he got back from Malaysia. And we have to understand that this is an Iranian. He's a very savvy guy. He's been all around the world and he's absorbed a lot of knowledge. He started his career in Vietnam, covering the end of the war in Vietnam. His comment when he got back from Malaysia is, he said, there's something happening there, and these people are really fanatics.
Really? Yeah.
This is a guy who went through Iran, and he thought that in comparison that there was something going on. He's continuing to document this. He is recently departed for Tunisia, and he hopes eventually to make it to the Islamic republics of the Soviet Union. He says that he believes something will happen there. By the way, he's one of the very few photographers who has covered the war in Afghanistan from the Kabul side.
Yeah, many of the things that are being covered by these people put them in great peril. In many cases, people don't realize it. It goes back to the point you brought up with Kappa and so being killed soon after this Magnum was started and so forth. It's been on the front line. It's been a very, very difficult and very often dangerous experience for these people who to be on the spot, as it were, and perhaps we haven't appreciated that. But it's very often dangerous. I mean, for still photographers and other electronic.
It's very dangerous. It's very dangerous.
Realize that. You know, we're so used to having films that were made in studios and so forth with a great deal of dramatic play and so forth. It is very hard for us to realize that documentary or the documentary that's documenting real life is very often hard won and hard to get.
Well, I think that with still photographers, there's a difference, and the difference, with some exceptions, I know that we're going to talk about Jeff Harmon next, and I consider him to be one of the exceptions, but with the electronic media, there's so much equipment to truck around that it limits the mobility of the news team. Now, this is not always the case. An NBC cameraman was killed in Bangkok covering an aborted coup last year. But, for example, in this series of pictures by James Nachtwey, who has recently joined Magnum and has been the recipient of the Robert Capa Award 3 times. This is an award given by the Overseas Press Club. He's the only human being alive that's gotten the Capa Award 3 times. He was sent by Geo magazine, which is a publication from Hamburg, a very, very, very important contributor to this business. He was sent to Sri Lanka in November 1986 to cover the uprising of the Tamils.
Beautiful,
yeah. The pictures are significant, and the story about what happened to him is completely significant also. He had to come across the straits from Tamil Nadu, which is the Indian state directly north of Sri Lanka, into the Jaffna Peninsula. Most of the pictures you see were done in the company of the Tamil Tigers, who were the guerrillas that were taking him on this tour. Now, he ducked away for about a half an hour. And when he came back, the Sinhalese had obliterated every individual in the guerrilla band that he was with. He was stuck. He didn't know where he was. He had no way of getting back to his contacts. He wandered around Sri Lanka for 10 days before he made it back to his contact and was able to get on the boat and go back to India. The rest of the world had heard nothing from him for 10 days. Everybody was in a panic.
So these images are, again, as you say, and underscored, are really, really very, very hard won. We've been talking about the Magnum, of course, has been interested in still photography. We're coming into an electronic age increasingly. You mentioned television and the electronic media. There is certainly a leading role that Magnum and still photography has played in terms of visual images, presenting that to the world society. Television has become more and more important, or film and television. The relationship between film and television and the still photography tradition of Magna is one that you're interested in, because in a certain sense they're sister institutions, sister concerns, and another there's some competition. What's the relationship between the still photography and the film and video people?
Well, as in many other industries, I think that we're moving toward a period. We're moving toward a period where the various media are all in competition with each other. And individuals within those media have a duty to cooperate with each other, not from a commercial point of view, but from a commercial point of view in what they believe.
Right. So those concerns, those philosophical concerns, and those concerns of the Frank Capra and the people at Magnum could translate into people who are involved with documentaries and electronic media and this kind of thing,
Well,
just as well in a philosophic sense.
Jeff Harmon is going to share this hour with me.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm concerned, what Robert Capa was doing 40 years ago in still photography, Harmon is doing now in filmmaking.
That's a tremendous tradition to live up to, and it's one that we might be able to see more and more happening as more and more young people coming along, other people coming along, will be able to take advantage of some of the video and filmic techniques in order to give us more and more images as we move through time. I mean, it's hard to remember that only 100 years ago we didn't have photography. I mean, things are becoming so very quickly now. 100 years ago
we didn't have photography.
Yeah, we were totally dependent
and 40
upon
years
print.
ago we didn't have television.
Yeah, that's right.
And in another 30 years, we're going to have things that you can't even dream of now.
Yeah, right.
We're going to have computer networks.
Yeah.
We're going to have radio networks, low frequency television.
Well,
all of this stuff is going to be mixed together.
Right.
And the driving force behind this this spectrum of media are going to be individuals who can cooperate. For example, I've stepped outside of Magnum to cooperate with Harmon because we have a vision of going beyond film, beyond still pictures, to create something else. I mean, it's an individual kinship.
All well and good, and as we move with increasing concern about some of these good visual images being able to become part of the literacy pattern of American and world society, there's an interest in taking the good example of people at Magnum to apply those ideas in terms of electronic images that are going to be able to be projected to the world citizenry as well. And it would seem to me Magnum's played a magnificent role in terms of pioneering that concern for the aesthetic and the question of the need to have the artistic representation of the photographer and let's say the videographer and the filmmaker and so forth be appreciated by the society in broad general terms. I want to congratulate you as director of the Magnum. It's a magnificent organization. We go on talking at great length. I want to thank you for showing these magnificent photographs. They're beautiful.
Thank you very much.
And it only touches the surface of what you have in the archive.
That's
obviously.
Right. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bob, for participating. I remind you, it's been your pleasure to have the perceptions of Bob Dannin, who is director of Magnum Photos, and we invite you to stay tuned. We have an upcoming piece with Jeff Harmon, documentarian, momentarily. So please stay tuned. We'll be coming right back. Once again, Bob, thank you very, very much indeed. Stay tuned. Coming right back.
Think about this. In our country, in Cyprus, this horror is reality. Since 1974, more than a third of Cyprus has been occupied by an invasion force from Turkey. We are a proud country. We have fought back every way we can. But we need help and understanding. We need you. People who love freedom. People who share our value of democracy.
And this country will be one again. And we will heal that jagged red scar that is across the body of this country.
I love New York. Health and Racket.
Welcome very much to this section. We're welcome to the program now, Jeff Harmon. And Jeff Harmon is an award-winning producer and director of film, documentary film, one particularly concerned with Afghanistan, one in Central America. And Jeff, welcome very, very much to conversation.
Well, welcome yourself to your own show, Harold.
Yeah, right, indeed. We were talking before with Bob Dannin about the fact that Frank Capra and some of those fellows that covered the wars and so forth, it's very often a dangerous situation, and you yourself can attest to the fact that you, and getting footage for some of these documentaries that you deservedly won awards for, it's very often been a dangerous situation. Maybe you could share a little bit of your own background.
First of all, Frank Capra, there was not too much danger for Frank Capra because
not
it's
Capra.
Wonderful films like
Frank
Mr.
Capra.
Smith Goes
Capra.
to Washington, but Bob Capra was a tremendous danger. My philosophy is to cover war from the combatants, basically. Yeah. So I take the same risks as the combatants.
All right.
There are no shortcuts in this area.
Yeah.
And in both my films, The Front Line, which was about the war in El Salvador, and in Jihad, Afghanistan's Holy War, I took some very extreme risks. Again, part of my philosophy is that I get into the skulls of the people that I'm filming, so that I will often learn the language first. I will spend many, many months in development for the film, in research, so that I know what I want before I arrive, but I'm still almost like a baby and innocent when I arrive, completely open-minded.
So you'll research the place that you're going to be going to and so forth, and have a pretty good idea of where you're going to go. Get a good, you know where you're going before you.
Absolutely. In fact, what I often do is, and what I did both with El Salvador and with Afghanistan, is I worked as a writer. I went on assignment as a writer and photographer first, and then after spending 4 or 6 months in the field, then I went back to make a film. But just to give you an idea of the risks, in my last film, Jihad, my cameraman, Alex Lindsay, and I went to Kandahar. Now, we were the first film crew in Kandahar in over a year.
All right.
The previous film crew had been ambushed, and one of the journalists had been captured.
Yes. He
was only released because he, due to pressure from the French Communist Party, he was released. And the first journalist in After Us was killed by a missile from a helicopter gunship while en route to Kandahar. So it was the most risky area in Afghanistan to film.
What would have happened if you had been captured?
Well, I'll tell you what would have happened.
Because you're under really a difficult situation.
Well, it was very simple. Vitaly S. Smirnov, who was not a vodka, but in fact was at that time the Soviet ambassador to Pakistan, announced that any Western journalist captured in Afghanistan would be executed. Pure and simple.
Wow.
So we went in under threat of execution.
And you were just smuggling yourself in?
Well, I smuggled myself in 6 times, let's put it that way. But we go in through old heroin smuggling routes and everything else. But what happened specifically about Kandahar, there was a mujahideen, a Afghan guerrilla leader who defected to the communist government and to the Soviets, so he knew all the routes. So a trip that used to take, say, about 8 hours from the Pakistan border to Kandahar now took 5 days in completely exposed terrain. And this is the terrain that we went under. And even in the best of times in the past, journalists would stay maybe 1 week in Kandahar. We stayed a month. And in fact, what we used to have to do was we'd go to war on the back of motorcycles, which is how they often do it in Kandahar. It's sort of like an Afghan version of the Wild Ones. And Alex and I would cover our equipment and our bodies with prayer shawls. And very often there were mortar explosions nearby, and we were many times shot at while filming a scene.
And then it became known by the Soviet authorities that you were there, and they actually attacked you.
Well, this is what happened. I'm going to show you a clip now, but in this clip you'll see what happened was that there was a spy at the military district who reported that Alex and I were in Kandahar, and the Soviets and Afghan army launched an operation to kill or capture me and my cameraman. And you'll see this footage right now. And in fact, in this operation, 25 mujahideen were killed and 37 were wounded.
Holy mackerel! It starts out, if I'm not mistaken, with a little boy of 9.
A 9-year-old. It starts off with a 9-year-old assassin.
A local leader or something there, and a 9-year-old assassin talking.
He's with Haji Latif, who's the Lion of Kandahar, the great leader of Kandahar.
Of the mujahideen.
And Cherokee is one of his child assassins.
Great. Well, listen, why don't we run that piece of tape right now, and then we can come back and talk some more about this.
Okay.
Okay.
This boy is 9 years old. He's a Cherokee, a hit-and-run guerrilla. I have many other children like this who throw grenades at communists in the bazaar.
My job is to sneak up to Russians and communists and shoot them with my pistol. If there's a large group of them, I throw a grenade. I throw it like this. Sometimes I shoot them with a machine gun.
According to a spy for the Mujahideen at the military district, the Soviets discovered the presence of the Western film crew in Kandahar. At 7 a.m., Soviet and Afghan army troops with tanks and armored personnel carriers surrounded Malajat in an effort to capture or kill Haji Latif and the foreigners.
Get some Russians over there. Where are they? Where are they?
Trapped for 3 hours, the Mujahideen managed to blast their way free with 82mm recoilless rifles.
Wow, that's fantastic. The fear that was in that fellow's eyes, you could see like that. And it's really interesting because we're talking now about a documentary of real-life situation, it seems to me. There was a situation that was, in a certain sense, it was like, I don't know how to explain it, but it was real. You were taking a scene that was going on. We're so accustomed to having films that would have been set up and staged in a studio, which have a great deal of action packed into them and so forth. But you were doing was gathering real footage of a real situation. The documentary is really a very, very different kind of vehicle than is the feature film that's made in a studio with all the actors doing what they're supposed to do and so forth. It's a really different operation and very real. It's a powerful movie, yeah.
Thank you, Harold. I mean, you keep in mind that a director directing actors on a set has complete control.
Yeah.
But to direct a documentary in a war zone is you have to direct. You have to find order out of chaos, out of complete anarchy.
Right.
Because instead of actors, you have you have bombs, and you have white phosphorus, and you have anti-aircraft fire, all of which is out there to kill you and your crew. And to be able to, you have to be like a machine. You know, you have to just have to hook in and work. You know, where everyone else is belly down, trying not to get killed. You've got to be working. This is the whole point. And I think that what I pride myself on is taking the risks, not just to film the hardware, because that's important, but to capture the human drama that average people go through when they're involved in a life and death struggle.
Yes, indeed. Well, that's a particularly dramatic moment in the human experience when there's something life and death going on like that. But what you're doing is again, back to that point, you're taking a bit of reality, and it's not being staged. Those guns were not being staged. You're taking a bit of reality and illuminating that for us and so forth. And it just seems to me, I'm just sort of in a sort of philosophical sense thinking that we would do well to be able to have a great deal more of that kind of material available to us than we are. We're so imbued with made-up, plastered-over images that are made by people who give us what they think we should, even though that's perhaps more dramatic in some cases than that. I think the real-life situations are more dramatic than anything you can conjure and come up with, almost.
Well,
you understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And there's not enough of that documentary kind of approach in terms of television. Maybe, again, back to some economic demands or something like that.
It's very much what Bob Dannin was saying about preconceived notions of editors in New York, Washington, Paris, London. They send you out into the field, but what they want is they want material that fits their own image. This is the problem. So when you
those images, too many are made in motion picture studio where everything's under control and you can manipulate. It's image making. You know.
Well, they want. I mean, I go and I spend my time usually with campesinos, with the peasants, as I did in El Salvador, with the same thing in Afghanistan. Now, this is often very offensive to people on either side of the ideological spectrum. I mean, both my films have been very controversial. My film, The Front Line, the left wing in England tried to ban it. There were right-wing elements in the United States who tried to ban and censor my second film, Jihad. So I'm always upsetting people, basically because I'm showing situation as it really is in all the positive and negative lights. And that's not what ideologues want in a highly polarized situation. They want a propaganda film.
You try and get both sides of something if you can?
I try and get things balanced, as balanced as possible. I think the best example was my film, The Front Line. Which,
now this is in El Salvador, right?
This is in El Salvador. Now this was filmed not only from the side of the army and the right wing, but from the side of the guerrillas and from the middle class and the civilians. My partner in that, Chris Wenner, who co-produced and co-directed The Front Line, he filmed the guerrillas, and I filmed the army and right wing, and we both filmed the civilians. And it was a very risky film to do because Chris was on the top of a hit list of a right-wing death squad.
My lord!
And I was very unpopular with the left. But the big danger was from our own people, because if each of our own people knew that Chris and I were working together, we could have been just blown away, quite simply.
And you took a great risk, if I'm not mistaken. You took a great risk, and you were the only person, I think, filmmaker in El Salvador that was able to get actually an interview with the leader of a death squad?
Yes, absolutely.
That was with great risk to do.
There's nobody before or since who's been able to do that. In fact, the only journalist who had contact with a right-wing death squad was John Sullivan, a freelancer for Hustler, who was murdered by a right-wing death squad his first night in El Salvador, simply out of mistaken identity. But I had set a goal when I arrived in El Salvador that eventually I was going to make contact with a right-wing death squad, and in fact, they made contact with me.
They finally did, and you were able to set up an interview with him where he talked his concerns and so forth.
The amazing thing is
we're going to see some of that.
Yes, this is one of the most extraordinary individuals I've ever interviewed, because he is a killer, and he thoroughly believes in what he's doing, and that it's necessary. And I became very close to him, and it was the only way to allow him to interview me. I mean, allow me to interview him.
Yeah.
And again, it was a matter of a great deal of time together and really getting in his skull to get this quite extraordinary interview.
And we might just say at the outset, you've deliberately put it in after the fact. I think you bring it so you can't recognize his face.
Exactly.
As he is,
we darkened it in the laboratory, obviously to protect his identity. And I think you'll see why when you see the clip.
Okay, we've got about 4 or 5 minutes here. People can see part of the film. This is called now The Front Line, and we want to talk a little bit about that series you were involved in and everything. But let's take a look at this, starting out with an interview with a real leader of one of the hit squads in El Salvador, done in 1980.
It was 1983.
83. Okay, coming up now.
I'm a member of what you American people call a death squad. As a matter of fact, I'm not a member of a death squad. I'm a member of a paramilitary group in the Department of Sultan. I got involved in these situations during the year of 1979, November, when the guerrillas killed my uncle. So I decided to take revenge. That's how I got involved. You American people call death squad like some specimen of monsters, something like that. We're not monsters. I mean, I'm a family man. I'm married. I have 2 kids. I'm an electromechanical engineer. I graduated from university, the United States. So I'm a paramilitary group. What we call paramilitary group is we, the people of El Salvador, who have taken the decision of protect ourselves. So that's the main reason why we formed these paramilitary groups. It's some kind of citizen association against crime, something like that. There are no human rights here, nor in any other country. I would like to ask you a question, I mean, personally. What about the human rights you violated in Vietnam? How about the human rights of the National Guard got burned alive when the guerrillas attacked a bus full of people? Nobody gives a damn about it. We do give a damn about it.
When you say you obtain information, how exactly do you obtain information from a captured guerrilla?
Shit, it's obvious. We torture them. The same way they torture our soldiers when they catch them.
Tell me how you torture them.
Well, same thing you did in Vietnam. We'll learn from you. We'll learn from you. There's means, like blow torches in the armpits, shocks in the balls, and electroshocks in the balls, and you know that very well. I mean, your armed forces know this means of obtaining information. Let's call it means of obtaining information from prisoners of war. They're not prisoners of war, but any prisoner will learn from you. That's what you taught us. There are many kinds of people involved in guerrilla warfare. There are the toughest ones, the tough ones, and the weak ones. The weak ones, we just tell them that we're going to kill them, and they speak. The tough ones, we have to beat them a little bit, then they speak. But the toughest one, we have to pop their eyes with a spoon. We just pop and spoon on the eye, and then the eye pop. I mean, pop out of, for instance, orbit. That's it.
Well, can you put the eye back in?
Sure thing.
I mean, what happens to the people who do that?
Well, you have to film it to believe it. But boy, they sure sing. And they sing loud, believe it.
After you obtain your information, what do you do then with the prisoner?
We dispose of his body in one of the main ways of the Sultan as an advertisement. Let's call an advertisement to other guys who are fighting the guerrillas against us. This is war. This is not a game. This is a fucking war.
How many guerrillas have you personally killed, tortured?
23.
Do you ever feel like a marked man? I mean, what would happen if the guerrillas got a hold of you?
Well, that's funny. I feel I'm already dead, you know, because I know about the guerrillas know about me, and so I'm always living I'm not going to tell you that I'm living in tension. That's not right. Huh? But I know that if they cut me, they're going to torture me. The same thing as I did with their companions. So I'm not giving any quarter because I don't expect any. That's the whole thing.
That's incredible. That's incredible footage. That's beautiful footage, and it's frightening in a certain sense because it's showing the difficulty of the life in which those people are living and so forth, and the veracity of the fighting that's going on there. How was it that you were able to get an interview with him when he didn't want to do it with ABC and all these great big entities and so forth? What was it made it possible for you to get close to that death squad leader like that? You were able to. Do you think it had anything to do with special philosophy of filmmaking or something that you have, or the way you approach it, or what?
I don't go in for the quick bang like the networks do. I spend the time, and I live with the people. I learn the language, I live with the people. And the way I worked it was I wanted him to come to me, and he did. I was the only journalist at that time traveling with the military, going into combat. All the other journalists were at the press conference each week with the Minister of Defense.
Well, you can stay at the good hotel easily.
Well, they
in
stay
the
at
capital,
the Camino Real, but I was going in and out of the field all the time. And they respected this. They respected this. And what happened was that I was the first journalist to travel with Atlacat, which was a U.S.-trained special battalion. And I knew the Major Asmitia very well, and Monterosa, both who were killed in a helicopter accident. But when he heard about me, he knew about me. And I was in the right places in combat, and he'd heard about me, and he came to me and started talking to me. And he was very cryptic when I first met him. I met him in a colonel's office. He was civilian. As you saw in the clip, he was a chemical engineer. But then he started confiding in me, and finally it was he had a need to speak, basically. And what I do is I break down the masks that people have. What's important to me is when the networks turn off their cameras, okay, that's when I start to turn on my cameras.
Really? Yeah.
Okay.
Right, yeah.
Only when they feel so comfortable with me that I'm one of them do I start filming them. And this is the way I operate. I'm not interested in doing topical films. I'm interested in documenting history and making films that will stand the test of history 5 years, 10 years, or 100 years from now.
You like shooting film, right? 16mm film for the most part?
I'm shooting 16 now. I want to shoot 35. I want to make feature films
You're totally committed to film? You don't think you can work with video?
I'm not saying I won't work in video. I've worked in video before, but I prefer the texture of film. And it's solid. I can hold on to it. I like the editing process with film much more than I do with video.
But they're sister institutions, and there's the same kind of thing. It's just a question of aesthetics and so forth in a large measure, I guess. It's not a matter of how easy it is to work one with the other and so forth. The formats, because it is a consideration. You're out there and you're lugging around equipment. It's a consideration, isn't it? Bob Dannin mentioned that before. Particularly for electronic journalists, you got to lug all this equipment. They're beginning to miniaturize and so forth. That is a consideration.
I had 13 porters in Afghanistan just to carry my film equipment in the mountainous region of Kunar.
Some guy would carry the tripod.
13, the MiGs would come dive bombing, and I nicknamed them Sufi tripod, Sufi solar changers. Sufi means bearded one. The MiG would attack, and Sufi tripod would be running in one direction, and Sufi solar charger in another. So it was very difficult. But the main thing, Harold, really is not so much the equipment, because I don't care how difficult it is. What's important to me is the philosophical aspect of film and the media, and how to entertain and yet provide knowledge. How to take people in Western Europe and Japan and the United States and all over the world and show them something that normally they wouldn't see, that Time and Newsweek wouldn't do, and that the networks wouldn't do. This is basically the same thing that Bob Dannin and Magnum are doing, and that's why Bob and I right now are working on some projects basically to expand the media.
Yeah, and there's so much that can be shown. There's so many stories that can be told, really. There's so many that can be told. And there's the skill involved with your direction, with the production. There's also the skill of the cinematography, beautiful cinematography you have in this film. And didn't the cinematographer on the El Salvador film get involved in some other things or something like
Robert Richardson was a cinematographer on the front line, and because of that, he got the job as cinematographer on Oliver Stone's Salvador, and then he went on to do Platoon. He was up for an Academy Award for it.
Yeah, it's beautiful cinematography, and that was work you were working with on that.
And Alexander Lindsay did a brilliant job.
Sure did.
On Jihad, an absolutely brilliant job.
Yeah. And it's a collaborative thing in a very real sense. It is a collaborative thing, but it takes the vision of someone who's got a story to tell and be able to tell the story
Exactly. You start with a vision, and then you work from that.
Right. And
it's kind of an empirical thing. But the thing is that the point is that there is plenty of room. You see, I hate to use the term alternative media, but not alternative in terms of ideological, but in terms of something that can be very commercial, very successful financially, and provide knowledge. This is the thing, and this is what I'm into.
Go on talking for a long time. Pleasure, Jeff Harmon. It's been your pleasure to have the perceptions of Jeff Harmon. We have a piece of tape that we want to go out with here. The show's part of the movie. We'll go out with that if you don't mind. It's been your pleasure to have the perceptions of Jeff Harmon. We'll be coming back again next week. That's it for this segment. We'll go out with a piece of your film if you don't mind.
That's okay with me, Harold. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, bye now. See you next week.
Where are the gorillas?
We've got them about 100 meters away. They're dug in front of us, but they haven't got the balls to come to us, the snakes. So we're seeing how we can get to them.
I'm a combat soldier. I'm a soldier of Altonal.
Soy soldado
I'm a combat soldier.
Soy soldado combatiente. Soy soldado del Altonal.
This is not a game. This is a fucking war.
How many guerrillas have you personally killed, tortured?
23.
Do you ever feel like a marked man? I mean, what would happen if the guerrillas got a hold of you?
Well, that's funny. I feel I'm already dead, you know, because I know about the guerrillas know about me, and so I'm always living. I'm not going to tell you that I'm living in tension. That's not right. Huh? But I know that if they cut me, they're gonna torture me. The same thing as I did with their companions. So I'm not giving any quarter because I don't expect any. That's the whole thing.
And, you know, so that's why we started dealing with them. The same time, in June of '85, was when memos were coming out of the National Security Council deciding to really go for set up Libya, set up Gaddafi for the attacks that, you know, that wasn't something that just happened.
Where are the guerrillas?
We've got them about 100 meters away. They're dug in front of us, but they haven't got the balls to come to us, the snakes. So we're seeing how we can get to them.